In 1905, at a photography studio in Boston, Massachusetts, a photograph was taken of a young girl, approximately 7 years old, standing outdoors on what appears to be a bright, sunny day. The girl is dressed in a beautiful white dress with ribbons and lace, wearing a large decorative hat, and holding an elegant parasol umbrella above her head. Her face appears to show a slight smile, and everything about the image suggests a joyful moment. A happy child dressed in her finest clothes, posing with a fashionable accessory on a beautiful day. For over 115 years, this photograph existed in historical collections as a charming example of Edwardian childhood photography. A delightful image of a well-dressed girl enjoying a moment of play or fashion. But in 2023, when this photograph was submitted for ultra-high-resolution digital scanning and analysis as part of a museum digitization project, specialists discovered something when they zoomed into the enhanced image that completely transformed this seemingly happy portrait into something profoundly sad and disturbing. The extreme magnification revealed details that had been invisible for over a century. Details hidden in the girl's face, in her posture, in subtle elements of the photograph that only modern digital zoom technology could expose. What appeared to be a smiling, happy child was actually something heartbreaking, and the umbrella she was holding had a purpose far different from what it seemed. Subscribe now, because this photograph tells a story about loss, about elaborate attempts to create one final beautiful memory, and about how far families would go to preserve an image of a child who was already gone. The photograph arrived at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in January 2023 as part of a collection of early 20th century American photography donated by the estate of Dorothy Harrison, whose grandmother had been an amateur photographer in Boston during the 1900s to 1910s. Among dozens of Edwardian-era photographs, street scenes, family gatherings, children at play, this particular image stood out for its apparent charm and the sophisticated composition. The photograph showed a young girl, appearing to be approximately 7 years old, photographed outdoors in what looked like a garden or park setting. The background showed greenery, trees or bushes, slightly out of focus, with dappled sunlight creating a bright, cheerful atmosphere. The girl herself was dressed elaborately and beautifully. She wore what appeared to be an expensive white dress, the kind of formal, fancy dress that Edwardian parents would purchase for special occasions like parties, church events, or formal portraits. The dress had multiple layers of fabric, delicate lace detailing, silk ribbons tied in bows, and elaborate embroidery. It was pristine and perfectly arranged, spreading gracefully around her. On her head she wore a large decorative hat, the fashionable wide-brimmed style popular in the early 1900s, adorned with flowers, ribbons, and what appeared to be feathers. The hat was tilted at a stylish angle, giving her a sophisticated, almost adult appearance despite her young age. Most notably, she was holding a parasol umbrella, an elegant accessory that was both fashionable and practical in the Edwardian era. The parasol was positioned above and slightly behind her head, opened to create a beautiful curved shape in the composition. The parasol appeared to be made of white or light-colored fabric, possibly lace or embroidered material, with a decorative handle visible where her small hands held it. Her posture appeared natural and poised. She stood upright, her body angled slightly toward the camera, one foot positioned slightly ahead of the other in a classic portrait stance. Her free hand, not holding the parasol, hung naturally at her side, touching the fabric of her dress. Most importantly, her facial expression appeared happy. At normal viewing distance, the girl seemed to have a slight smile, the kind of pleasant, contented expression that photographers would try to coax from child subjects. Her face was turned toward the camera, and everything about her demeanor suggested a happy child enjoying a special day. dressed in her finest clothes, playing with a beautiful parasol. The photograph's composition was sophisticated for amateur photography. The lighting was excellent, bright but not harsh, with the parasol creating interesting shadows. The background was appropriately blurred to keep focus on the subject. The overall effect was of a professionally executed portrait of a well-off Edwardian child in a moment of innocent joy. On the back of the photograph, written in neat handwriting, Little Rose, Boston Common, May 1905, Our Angel. Dr. Catherine Reed, the museum's curator of American photography, made her initial assessment with genuine appreciation. Lovely example of early 20th century child photography. Excellent composition and lighting for amateur work. The subject appears happy and well cared for. The use of the parasol as both prop and compositional element is quite sophisticated. This image beautifully captures the aesthetic of prosperous Edwardian childhood. The inscription, Our Angel, is a common endearment of the era. Recommend for high-resolution scanning and possible inclusion in Edwardian childhood exhibition. Dr. Reed was particularly impressed by the technical quality of the photograph and the evident care taken in creating such a beautiful image. She scheduled it for priority scanning, expecting it to be a highlight of their collection. A charming, well-executed portrait that would delight museum visitors and photography enthusiasts. She had no idea that when the photograph was scanned at ultra-high resolution and examined under extreme digital magnification, what appeared to be a moment of childhood happiness would reveal itself as something entirely different and heartbreaking. Dr. Michael Torres, the museum's digital imaging specialist, began the high-resolution scanning process on the photograph of Little Rose. As he worked with the image at increasingly higher magnifications, recovering details that were invisible to the naked eye in the original print, he began to notice elements that made him progressively more uncomfortable. The first thing that caught his attention was the parasol itself. At normal viewing, it appeared to be simply held by the girl. But when Dr. Torres zoomed in on the area where her hands met the parasol handle, something looked odd. The girl's hands appeared to be positioned on the handle, but at extreme magnification, the grip looked wrong. Her fingers weren't actively gripping. They were placed on the handle, but there was no visible tension, no natural curve of fingers holding something. The hands appeared to have been carefully positioned around the handle rather than naturally grasping it. More concerning, when Dr. Torres examined the parasol's position and angle carefully, it appeared to be supported by something other than the girl's hands. The angle of the parasol shaft suggested there was additional support, possibly a stand or frame hidden behind her, actually holding the parasol upright, while her hands were simply posed to appear as if she was holding it. Could be a hidden support to keep the pose stable during long exposure, Dr. Torres noted. Early 1900s photography did require subjects to remain very still, and photographers often used various tricks and supports to help maintain poses. He then examined the girl's posture more carefully. At first glance, she appeared to be standing naturally, but under high magnification, examining the way her body was positioned, something seemed off about her balance and stance. Her feet were positioned in a specific way, one slightly ahead of the other, but there was no visible weight distribution, no natural shift of balance that a living person standing in that position would show. She appeared to be standing, but the biomechanics of the stance looked wrong when examined closely. Most troublingly, when Dr. Torres zoomed in on the area behind the girl, examining the background and the space around her body, he began to see shapes that had been completely invisible at normal viewing distance. Behind her dress, partially obscured by the fabric and the bright outdoor lighting, There appeared to be some kind of structure or frame. It looked like metal supports, possibly a standing frame of some kind, positioned directly behind her body. Support stand for long exposure, Dr. Torres thought, though he was growing increasingly uncertain about that explanation. He then turned his attention to the girl's face, examining it at maximum magnification. What he found made him immediately call Dr. Reed. At normal viewing, the girl appeared to have a slight smile and a happy expression. But at extreme zoom, examining every detail of her facial features, that impression completely changed. Her eyes, which had seemed to be looking at the camera with a pleasant expression, revealed themselves under magnification to have a fixed, glassy quality. There was no life in the eyes, no focus, no awareness. They were open, but they were staring without seeing, the distinctive vacant gaze that Dr. Torres had learned to recognize in his years of examining historical photographs. Her skin tone, when examined in extreme detail and with careful analysis of the photographic tones, showed an unusual pallor. Even accounting for the black and white photography and the bright outdoor lighting, her skin appeared to have a waxy, translucent quality that seemed wrong. Most disturbingly, what had appeared to be a slight smile revealed itself, under magnification, to be something else entirely. Her mouth was positioned in a specific way, carefully arranged to create the appearance of a pleasant expression. But the facial muscles showed no tension, no natural movement. The smile appeared to have been created by carefully positioning the mouth rather than by any actual facial expression. "Dr. Reed," Dr. Torres said when she answered his call, his voice tight with concern. "I think you need to see the high-resolution scans of the Rose photograph. I think there's something wrong with this image. I don't think this girl is alive in this photograph. I think this is a post-mortem portrait, and the family went to extraordinary lengths to make it look like she was happy and healthy and enjoying a beautiful day outdoors." Dr. Reed and Dr. Torres examined the ultra-high-resolution scans together, and as they studied the magnified details, both became increasingly convinced that this was indeed a post-mortem photograph, and an unusually elaborate one. The evidence accumulated as they examined every detail. The support structure behind the girl became clearly visible in the enhanced scans. It was an elaborate metal frame, much more substantial than a simple posing stand for living subjects. The frame appeared to have multiple support points, behind her back, at her neck, hidden by the hat, possibly at her waist, concealed by the dress, and at her legs, hidden by the voluminous skirt. This wasn't equipment to help a living child hold still during exposure. This was a framework actually holding a deceased child's body in an upright standing position, a position that would be impossible for a dead body to maintain without extensive support. The parasol was also clearly supported by the frame rather than being held by the girl. The magnified images showed what appeared to be a metal rod or support extending from the main frame to hold the parasol in position, with the girl's hands simply posed around the handle to create the illusion that she was holding it. Most telling was the extreme magnification of the girl's face and eyes. Her eyes showed all the classic signs of post-mortem photography with open eyes. They had been manually positioned open, possibly with small props or through direct manipulation, and were staring without focusing, with the distinctive cloudiness that appears in eyes within hours of death. The smile was clearly artificial. The mouth had been carefully positioned to turn upward slightly at the corners, creating the appearance of a pleasant expression. But there was no actual facial muscle engagement that would create a genuine smile. Dr. Reed immediately began researching Boston death records from 1905, searching for any child named Rose who died around May 1905, the date written on the photograph. Death certificates from Boston in May 1905 revealed Rose Elizabeth Morrison, age 7 years, 2 months. Date of death, May 12, 1905. Cause, scarlet fever. Address, Beacon Hill, Boston. The researchers then investigated the Morrison family. Census records showed they were a wealthy family living in Boston's prestigious Beacon Hill neighborhood. The father, Edward Morrison, was a successful banker. The mother, Elizabeth Morrison, came from old Boston money. Rose was their only child, their angel, as the photograph inscription called her. Research into early 1900s photography practices in Boston revealed several photographers who advertised memorial portraiture and artistic remembrance photography. One photographer in particular, Jonathan Ashby, who operated a studio on Tremont Street, advertised services that included outdoor memorial portraits and lifelike memorial photography in natural settings. His advertisements specifically mentioned memorial portraits created with sensitivity and artistry, outdoor settings available, elaborate poses and props to create beautiful, lifelike remembrances. Our specialized techniques ensure your loved one appears peaceful, natural, and at rest in their favorite activities or finest attire. The mention of outdoor settings was significant. Most post-mortem photography was done indoors in studios. But some photographers, catering to wealthy clients willing to pay premium prices, offered the service of creating memorial photographs that appeared to show the deceased in outdoor settings, either by actually photographing outdoors, which required extensive equipment and planning, or by creating elaborate staged outdoor scenes in large studios. The parasol in the photograph was also significant. In Edwardian culture, a parasol was associated with sunny days, leisurely walks, fashion, and happiness. For a family trying to create one final image of their daughter that showed her as they wanted to remember her, happy, beautiful, enjoying a lovely day, the parasol was the perfect prop. The Morrison family had apparently commissioned an extraordinarily elaborate memorial photograph. Their dead daughter posed standing upright with an extensive support frame, dressed in her finest white dress and hat, positioned with a parasol as if she were enjoying a beautiful spring day in a park, with her eyes opened and mouth positioned to appear happy. The photograph wasn't taken on Boston Common, as the inscription suggested. It was almost certainly taken in a studio with a painted or constructed outdoor backdrop, or possibly in an actual outdoor location, with the body extensively supported and posed. This level of elaborate staging, creating the complete illusion of a living, happy child, represented an extraordinary expense and effort, even by the standards of wealthy Edwardian families who could afford memorial photography. As Dr. Torres continued to analyze the ultra-high-resolution scans, extracting every possible detail from the 118-year-old photograph, the full extent of the elaborate memorial staging became undeniably clear and heartbreaking. The support framework holding Rose's body was revealed in complete detail in the enhanced images. It was a sophisticated piece of equipment, likely custom-built or specially adapted for this particular memorial photograph. The main vertical support ran directly up Rose's back, hidden by her dress. Secondary supports extended at multiple points, behind her neck, concealed by her long hair and the hat, at her waist, hidden by the dress's sash and layers, and at her lower legs, concealed by the voluminous skirt. The framework even appeared to have supports extending to hold her arms in position, one arm hanging naturally at her side, the other raised to the parasol. Without these supports, a deceased person's arms would hang limply or fall away from the body. The supports were holding her arms in specific, carefully chosen positions to create the appearance of natural, living posture. The parasol support was particularly elaborate. A metal rod extended from the main framework to hold the parasol at the exact correct angle and position. Rose's small hands had been carefully arranged around the handle, her fingers positioned one by one to look like a natural grip, then left in that exact position for the photograph. When Dr. Torres examined Rose's eyes at maximum magnification, the evidence of post-mortem manipulation became undeniable and disturbing. Her eyes had been manually opened, held open by small props or possibly by someone's fingers positioned just outside the photograph's frame during exposure, then removed before final printing, or carefully retouched out of the image. The eyes showed the distinctive cloudiness and opacity that develops within hours of death. No amount of careful positioning could make dead eyes look truly alive when examined under high magnification. They lacked the reflective quality, the subtle moisture, the focused awareness of living eyes. Most heartbreaking was the evidence of how carefully Rose's facial expression had been manipulated. Under extreme magnification, Dr. Torres could see subtle marks around her mouth that suggested her lips had been manually positioned, possibly with fingers or small tools, to create the upward curve that appeared, at normal viewing distance, to be a smile. This wasn't unusual for elaborate post-mortem photography. Photographers and families would go to great lengths to create pleasant, peaceful expressions rather than the slack-faced appearance that death naturally produces. But seeing the evidence of such careful manipulation in the face of a 7-year-old child made the image particularly poignant. Rose's skin, when examined in extreme detail, showed the telltale signs of death that had been partially, but not completely obscured by the photographer's techniques. Her skin had a waxy, almost translucent quality. There was slight discoloration visible around her eyes and mouth, the beginnings of decomposition that even the best Edwardian photography techniques couldn't completely hide when viewed at modern ultra-high resolution. The outdoor setting, upon closer examination, revealed itself to be almost certainly a studio creation. The trees in the background, when magnified, appeared to be painted backdrop elements, the kind that skilled scenic painters would create for photography studios. The dappled sunlight was likely created by carefully positioned studio lighting designed to simulate outdoor illumination. Even the grass or ground visible at the bottom of the frame appeared, under magnification, to be artificial, possibly fabric or painted flooring, designed to look like outdoor ground. The entire scene was an elaborate theatrical production. A dead child held upright by an extensive metal framework, dressed in expensive formal clothing, positioned with a fashionable parasol, her eyes forced open and mouth arranged into a smile-like expression, photographed in a constructed outdoor setting designed to create the illusion that she was alive, happy, and enjoying a beautiful spring day. The extreme lengths the Morrison family went to, the expense, the elaborate preparation, the careful staging, the extensive support framework, the manipulated facial expression, all testified to their desperate desire to have one final image of Rose that showed her not as death had taken her, but as they wanted to remember her. Their beautiful daughter, dressed in her finest clothes, happy and alive on a lovely day. With the photograph's true nature confirmed, Dr. Reed intensified her research into the Morrison family and the tragic story behind this elaborate memorial portrait. What she discovered added profound emotional context to the already heartbreaking image. Rose Elizabeth Morrison was born on March 8, 1898, in Boston to Edward and Elizabeth Morrison. She was their only child, a much-wanted daughter born after several miscarriages. Family correspondence preserved in Boston historical archives showed that Rose was cherished and doted upon by her wealthy parents. Scarlet fever, the disease that killed Rose, was one of the most feared childhood illnesses of the early 1900s. The bacterial infection caused high fever, a distinctive red rash, sore throat, and often led to serious complications, including heart damage, kidney failure, and death. Before antibiotics, which wouldn't be developed for another 4 decades, scarlet fever killed thousands of American children every year. Medical records from Boston in spring 1905 showed a scarlet fever outbreak affecting dozens of children in the city. Parish records indicated that 6 children died of scarlet fever in Boston during the 2 weeks around Rose's death. According to death certificates, Rose Morrison became ill on May 7, 1905, and died just 5 days later on May 12th, a tragically swift progression of the disease. She was 7 years, 2 months old. Dr. Reed found correspondence between Elizabeth Morrison and photographer Jonathan Ashby, preserved in Ashby's business papers that had been donated to a photography historical society. The letters were heartbreaking in their detail. In a letter dated May 13, 1905, the day after Rose's death, Elizabeth Morrison wrote to Ashby, "We have lost our beloved daughter Rose to scarlet fever. She was our only child, our angel, our entire world. We have no photographs of her in her latest beautiful white dress, which we purchased for her 7th birthday party that she never lived to attend. Would it be possible to photograph her wearing this dress, with her new parasol that she never had the chance to use? We want to remember her as she should have been. Happy, beautiful, alive on a lovely spring day. Money is no object. Whatever it costs, whatever it requires, please help us have one beautiful image of our Rose." Ashby's response, dated May 14th, outlined the extensive preparations and costs involved in creating such an elaborate memorial photograph. The creation of an outdoor memorial portrait of the type you envision will require specialized equipment, extensive staging, and considerable time and expertise. The cost will be $200, equivalent to approximately $7,000 in modern currency, which includes all necessary materials, equipment rental, studio time, and multiple attempts if needed to achieve the desired effect. I will need to photograph Rose within 48 hours of passing for best results. Financial records showed that Edward Morrison paid Ashby $250, even more than the quoted price, on May 15, 1905. The photograph was likely taken on May 15th or 16th, 1905. Within 3 to 4 days of Rose's death and just days before her burial, which occurred on May 17, 1905. Her grave at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, still exists, with a monument reading, "Rose Elizabeth Morrison, our beloved angel, 1898 to 1905, forever in our hearts." Further research revealed the Morrison family's life after Rose's death. The grief devastated them. Elizabeth Morrison's health declined significantly. Medical records suggest severe depression and what we would now recognize as complicated grief. She lived until 1923, but remained in fragile health. Edward Morrison continued working, but never fully recovered emotionally. In his will, probated in 1931, he left his entire estate to establish the Rose Morrison Children's Health Fund at Boston Children's Hospital, specifically funding scarlet fever research and treatment. Most poignantly, Dr. Reed found evidence that the elaborate memorial photograph was displayed in the Morrison home for the remainder of Elizabeth and Edward's lives. A 1910 interview with Elizabeth Morrison for a women's magazine included a description of the Morrison home, which mentioned, "A large framed portrait of the Morrisons' late daughter Rose occupies a place of honor above the fireplace in the drawing room. The portrait shows a beautiful child in white, holding a parasol, appearing to enjoy a lovely day, a cherished memory of happier times." The interviewer had no idea she was describing a post-mortem photograph. The elaborate staging had succeeded in its purpose. creating an image that appeared to show Rose alive and happy, rather than the tragic reality of her death. The photograph remained in the Morrison family through several generations. It was passed down through relatives, Edward's brother's family, since Edward and Elizabeth had no other children, each generation treasuring it as a portrait of Cousin Rose, who died young in 1905, without realizing its true nature as a post-mortem photograph. Eventually, the photograph, along with other Morrison family papers and photographs, came into the possession of Dorothy Harrison, a great-great-niece of Edward Morrison, who donated the collection to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in 2023, still not realizing what the lovely portrait of little Rose actually showed. Dr. Reed's research also uncovered that this type of extremely elaborate post-mortem photography, staging outdoor scenes, creating elaborate illusions of life and happiness, was rare even in the early 1900s. Most memorial photography showed the deceased at rest, eyes closed, in peaceful repose, creating the illusion of an active, happy, living child was unusual and expensive. This photograph represents the absolute peak of what post-mortem photography could achieve, Dr. Reed noted in her research report. The Morrison family spent enormous sums, and the photographer employed extraordinary technical skill to create something that didn't just memorialize their daughter, but created a complete, alternate reality. A world where Rose hadn't died, where she got to wear her birthday dress, where she got to use her new parasol, where she was happy and alive on a beautiful spring day. When we look at this photograph knowing what it really shows, it stops being creepy or morbid and becomes profoundly sad. We're seeing parents' desperate love, their inability to accept the reality of their loss, their need to preserve an image, not of their dead child, but of the child they wish she could still be. The photograph that seemed to show a happy moment actually shows the opposite of happiness. It shows grief so profound that no expense or effort was too much to create one final beautiful lie, one last image where their daughter was alive and smiling. The photograph of Rose Morrison is now displayed in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, with a detailed explanation of its nature and the story behind it. The museum's caption reads, "This photograph appears to show a happy child enjoying a spring day. In reality, it shows 7-year-old Rose Morrison shortly after her death from scarlet fever in May 1905. Her grieving parents commissioned an elaborate memorial photograph, staging her as alive and happy, a heartbreaking testament to parental love and the lengths families will go to preserve memory and deny death." Visitor reactions to the photograph, once they understand its true nature, are often emotional. Many visitors cry when reading Rose's story. Parents, especially, respond with profound empathy, understanding the Morrison parents' desperate need to have one image of their child looking happy rather than acknowledging the reality of death. Rose Morrison died at age 7 in 1905. But in this photograph, created through elaborate staging, expensive equipment, and desperate parental love, she is forever preserved as her parents wanted to remember her, not dead, but alive, not sick, but healthy, not gone, but present, not sad, but happy, standing in sunshine with her beautiful parasol, dressed in her birthday party dress, smiling at the camera as if she had her whole life ahead of her. The photograph isn't really a document of death. It's a document of love that refused to accept death, of parents who wanted to preserve not what was real, but what should have been real, what they desperately wished could have been real. When modern technology zoomed in far enough to see past the illusion, it revealed not just the technical details of post-mortem photography, but the human heart of parents who would do anything, pay any price, go to any length, to have one beautiful image of their daughter that showed not the tragedy of her death, but the joy of what her life should have been.